gridirons to the courts, to the links, the fast turns, and the home runs. Heard only on Source Radio Network. You're now listening to Sports Tuesday with your host, Steve Manderson.
And welcome to Sports Tuesday. I am your host, Steve Manderson. Hope everybody's having a great day today. I hope everybody had a great week last week and a great weekend. All right. We have a great show for you tonight. I know the college basketball season concluded last night. Baseball started up about 4 days ago, and but tonight is going to be a night of boxing. We're going to have we'll talk about a boxer from the old 1800s, and then we'll also talk about a boxer from the 1950s. Legendary boxers at that. In the first hour, my first guest has his own boxing show called the Billy C Show, and he has a book out entitled Tom MOLINEAUX, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. Okay, and the author is Billy Calogero. All right, so he will be on in the first hour to talk about this amazing boxer back in the 1800s, where basically it was bare knuckle fighting, and he'll talk to us about what this fighter was all about back in the day. In the second hour, my guest is no stranger to Sports Tuesday. He has been on the show before. In fact, he was on, I think, last year, and did a book then called Max Barr and Barney Ross. Title of the book was Jewish Boxer. Jewish Heroes on Boxing. That was the name of the book. Max Barr and Barney Ross. This time around, he has his latest book is entitled Rocky Graziano, Fits, Fame, and Fortune. So we'll be talking about the legendary Rocky Graziano, and the author's name, as I welcome back, would be Jeffrey Sussman. So Billy Calogero in the first hour, Jeffrey Sussman in the second hour. This will be a night of boxing here at Sports Tuesday. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, my first guest will be Billy Calogero. So you guys hang in there, and we'll be right back.
Source Nation, you're listening to Sports Tuesday with Steve Manderson. We'll be right back.
Radio Network is just one of the many platforms that is used to fulfill dreams of our listeners and create a purpose that will impact the lives of our communities, cities, and the world. It is often said that great things will happen when a group of driven people work together to accomplish one goal. We're giving people the opportunity to have a voice, translate words that haven't been heard, and paint pictures that no one has seen. Source Radio Network is fueling your life's purpose. How can you listen? www.blogtalkradio.com/Source Radio.
Hello, Source Nation. Join us every Sunday night on Mailbox Sunday from 8 to 9 Eastern Standard Time for Practical Kingdom Living with me, your host, Pastor Kenny Smith. Tune in as I share principles designed to help build your relationship with God and others.
Welcome back, Source Nation. You're listening to Sports Tuesday with Steve Manderson.
Welcome back to Sports Tuesday. I'm your host, Steve Manderson. Okay. As I said, Sports Tuesday. This is boxing night at Sports Tuesday. My first guest is Billy Calogero. We'll be talking about his book, Tom MOLINEAUX, and the title of the book, which is a unique title, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. So he'll be on in just a few. And in the second hour, Jeffrey Sussman will be talking about his latest book, Rocky Graciano, Fist, Fame, and Fortune. Okay. A couple of things to note before my first guest comes on. Want to give congratulations to the Villanova Wildcats for being the 2018 NCAA national champions in their destruction of Michigan last night, 79-62, at the Alamo in San Antonio. They pretty much had an excellent run throughout the tournament. I mean, it actually started, from Big East, from the Big East tournament at the Garden, which I was there for, and they just carried on straight through the tournament. And but congratulations to Villanova, Jeffrey J. Wright, and his team. Their second national championship in 3 years. They under Jay Wright, they won in 2016, and actually altogether, it's 3 national championships for those well known with college basketball. The first title came in the early 80s, classic game, one of the great NCAA finals of all time, when they beat heavily favored Georgetown team that year, and a very close game at one of the Villanova's greatest performances offensively, and this was under Coach Raleigh Massimino. And these next 2 titles are under Jay Wright, who before Villanova was coach of Hofstra. and what he's done for his own career. And so, congratulations to the Villanova Wildcats. I think now by their performance this year, hopefully this could put the strength back into the Big East Conference. So, which I always felt was watered down for the last few years. All right, so congratulations to them. And they've got a lot of freshmen and sophomores coming back, so let's see how I do for next year. One other note before I bring on my guest, normally, this is a plus, I rarely do happy birthdays, but this one I feel is very special. Over the weekend, in fact, Easter Sunday was the birthday of legendary movie and television actress Doris Day. 96 years old. God bless her. Her movies with Rock Hudson was famous back in the 50s, had a television show that lasted about 9 years, but 96. And very happy for her, and God bless her. So I'm always doing somebody famous dying. This time I'm happy to praise someone that's still living. Okay. So now get that good news out of the way. All right. My first guest, as I said, this is a night of boxing. My first guest has a radio show called the Billy C Show, boxing show. And we're going to talk about his first book. And that title of the book is Tom MOLINEAUX, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. Let me bring on right now Billy Calogero. Billy, how are you?
Good, Steve. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much for coming on the show. The book was intriguing enough. The old school boxing. I mean, bare knuckles. Let me ask you this off the bat. In today's boxing, who would, in your opinion, would survive a bare knuckle fight?
Today's fighters, none of them would. There's not one. Now, wait a minute. There is bare knuckle boxing that takes place today, but so with all due respect to guys like Bobby Gunn, who actually fights in bare knuckle, and there's still stuff over in England that they do it. You know, obviously. In the back rooms and stuff. So with all due respect to those guys, because it's obviously a lot tougher than with gloves. But any professional gloved boxer today, I would find it very hard to believe that they would have been able to survive, especially in the era of Tom MOLINEAUX.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. They don't even train properly in this modern era, let alone take a beating with the bare hands. But today we're talking about Tom MOLINEAUX. What inspired you to do the book?
You know, that's usually the first question people ask, and I always respond with a little story. And this is the God's honest truth of how it happened. I was researching a series of books. Pierce Egan was considered the first sports writer. He was the first guy to cover live sports, and boxing was one of them. And he put out this series of books chronologically, the boxing from its beginning in the 1700s all the way through the era in which he was covering, which was the early 1800s. And I got my hands on 3 copies. That was a story in itself. The first 3 copies, Boxania 1, 2, and 3. And I was flipping through Boxania 1, and I came across this story, and I start reading about the fight, the Tom MOLINEAUX fight against Tom Cribb, and they're describing the two combatants. MOLINEAUX described as black as coal. They called him the Black, and I picture this dark black, dark black-skinned man, and they describe Tom Cribb, lily white, like milk, and I'm saying this is a white guy, right? So I'm reading it, the author says by the 13th round they were so beaten and disfigured and covered in blood that you couldn't tell the two combatants apart. And the impact that statement made on me, I just was like, I got to learn more about Tom Molineaux. And I went and 7 years of research to produce the book that I put out.
Now, he was born a slave, and he was originally from Britain, and
no,
he came to.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but no. Tom Molineaux was born a slave in the United States in Virginia, and he basically fought for his freedom against his will. He really didn't even want to fight. He was forced into fighting, ended up winning, and ended up in New York. And he was a professional fighter, and actually was considered the first American heavyweight champion. And he wanted to make more money. He was working on the docks in New York, and all of those ships coming in said, "Oh man, you got to go to England. You got to go to England to make money. That's where boxing's big." And he found his way on a ship and landed in England, started calling out Tom Cribb, who was considered unbeatable. Everybody thought he was a nutcase. And the rest is history.
Yeah, and his actual first fight was against Jack Burroughs, and it took 65 minutes to do that. He was also trained by Bill Richmond, who was ex-slave, also turned boxer. Now, back then, a lot of times when they fought, it was the owners, as you pointed out, made the money off of Molineaux. At what point did Molineaux start to see the benefits of knuckle boxing?
Well, now when you say owners, I think you're referring to when he was fighting as a slave, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was before. You got to remember, he was forced to fight as a slave. Yes, the owners would. It was a form of entertainment. During my research in Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate, they wouldn't admit that slave fighting took place. The owners would bet on it. It was a form of entertainment, and what happened was his owner basically bet the whole plantation on this guy to fight, and he never fought before. So by the time he won his freedom and some money. Then he went and started boxing, and that was considered his professional boxing career. Now, the fights in the States weren't we didn't keep very good records during that time, let alone from a freed slave. So the records that you're referring to when you say his first fight, that was actually like his 30th fight. So by the time he got to England, where they did keep records, that's where we had it. The benefits, well, he started seeing benefits in his mind right away. He thought that the fame, and every time he went into a pub, people would buy him beers and food, and he had women on each arm, and life was great for him. The problem was Bill Richmond really didn't look out for him. He was making money too. And, although he was considered the first really big world-recognized sports figure, he ended up not being taught the right way. Remember, this was a guy that was uneducated, and really, the way I see it is Bill Richmond took advantage of him.
Sort of a comparison to Don King. This era.
I knew. You know what? I had a feeling you were going to say that. Yes, by the way people perceive Don, yes, along those lines. Even though there's, I could get into many stories about Don where he gets the bad rap when he shouldn't. But that's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah. Now Molyneux was short, and at 5'8", a quarter inches tall. Reminded me a lot of boxers like Tyson, who was not tall, and even Joe Frazier, not tall. So, and he weighed 198 pounds. Now, he was listed as a middleweight.
No, he was a heavyweight. He was a heavyweight, but 198 pounds, 5'8", chiseled muscle, was a pretty big dude back then. Even Jack Johnson, who was a world heavyweight champion, he was regarded as a monster in the early 1900s, and he was not even quite 6'1". So. What we see today with heavyweights, you see a heavyweight today, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, 6'6", 6'7", respectively. We're talking apples and oranges compared to, 200 years ago.
Now, these fights went a long time, in terms of rounds. Sometimes, anywhere from 30 to 35 rounds. That's pretty much sounds like to me like a fight to the death kind of a situation. Were there situations like that where it wound up being, let's say, a fight to the death?
Oh yeah, many times. Many times fighters would never fight again. They would literally, die from the injuries. Now, you have to keep one thing in mind. They weren't fighting by the same rules as we do today. Today, we fight at Marquess of Queensberry rules, and that's based on 3 minutes per round with a 1-minute rest period in between rounds. When Tom Molyneux fought, what constituted a round was when a fighter hit the ground. When he hit the ground, that was considered the end of the round. Then they would have 30 seconds to be ready, or come to scratch was the term that they would use. So a lot of times one round could be, if a fighter is ready to get knocked out, one round could be 30 seconds. 20 seconds, but then also with the same token, a round could be an hour and a half before a guy hits the ground. So what they did is they counted the rounds, but they would always record the length of the fights at that time. And there were fights that lasted several hours, of guys beating each other pretty much to death. And the other part of it, and we actually were talking about this on my show this morning, was that, the fighters back then, only the winner got the money. The loser, they would take up a collection for him. And whatever people decided to give, and in a lot of cases they'd literally pass around a hat to the spectators and take up a collection, and that's all that the loser would make. It was a winner take all back then.
So even if you lost, if you didn't give a good performance, chances are you really didn't get anything.
There was many times when that was exactly the case.
Now, back then, how were the fights set up? What it was just how did they? Was there a thing called a fight promoter back then, where we're gonna get a fighter for Molyneux or something like that? Was there a promoter type back then to set up these fights?
Yeah, that's a great question because, first of all, boxing was illegal. You weren't allowed to do it. And the amazing thing was that these promoters, we're talking about, you mentioned Don King before, Don King, Bob Arum are considered probably the two best boxing promoters in the history of the sport. However, back then, the promoter was able to get 5,000 and 10,000 people to watch these fights. And I mean, not all the time. There were times when there were 100 people. There were times when it took place in an alley, after a night of drinking. But these big fights, they would have 5, 10, 15. I mean, they were 10,000 and 20,000 respectively for the two MOLINEAUX Cribb fights, and they would sell tickets to these fights with no date, no time, no location on the ticket. It was all done through underground, letting people know where it was. They used to get on a train and drive out and stop in the middle, go a couple of miles so the law couldn't catch them quick enough. And they would set up a ring and all the people would be there. It's amazing. Talk about the promotion aspect. As far as who would fight who and set up the fights, those were challenged. The fighter would go to a paper and say, I challenge so-and-so. And they put up money. They say, well, I'll put up this much money to fight him. I'm the better man. And then he gets a certain amount of time to respond through the newspaper. That's how they would track it. And then he would put up that match the money. They would set a date and, do it. Then the winner got both sides of the money. The winner would get, if they put what was equivalent to $5,000 each up, let's say, I'm just using that as an example, the winner would take that $10,000. The loser gets a hat passed around.
Wow. Now, Tom MOLINEAUX, African American, back in the day, how many African Americans would you say fighters were there back then?
There wasn't that many. It was a different world. I can't have there was so many fighters, but predominantly here's the deal. Predominantly boxing in an organized format during that time was taking place in England. The U.S. really didn't adopt boxing. Now remember, England didn't have slavery. We did. So the slaves were treated as a tool, as a value to a plantation owner. They needed these people to work for them. So they didn't really look at them as an athlete. When they had the slave fighting, remember, they were taking advantage of these people. They were forcing them to fight. Half the time they were fighting their family or their friends or whatever, and somebody had to live and somebody couldn't. They would have fights to the death. That's the slave end of it. When the fighters were able to gain their freedom or however they did, if they became fighters, they did. But there wasn't a heck of a lot of them at that time. It wasn't until after the Civil War that bare-knuckle boxing started becoming more popular in the United States, and that was primarily due to they looked at it as a exercise. They looked at it as for fitness, and that's when boxing started to become a little more organized in the U.S., and we didn't really see it to its best extent until the John L. Sullivan days. And then it was segregated. The black fighters would only be allowed to fight the black fighters, and the white fighters would fight the white fighters. Occasionally, they would be what they called crossing the color line, and you would see a black fighter fight a white fighter. But there were champions that refused to fight a black fighter, and that all changed with Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson changed the way, the sport was and opened the door for a lot of black fighters, despite the way he went about it. He went about it in a negative way. He ruffled some tail feathers, but he just couldn't deal with the fact that he was being treated as a second-class citizen when he was the heavyweight champion of the world. So a lot of the desegregation, so to speak, that took place over that 100 years, people got to give guys like Jack Johnson more credit, because he was one of the first guys to stand up for his rights. Despite even his own people were saying, don't do it, don't rock the boat, but he did what he felt was right, and it was the right thing,
Now, when MOLINEAUX when he wasn't fighting, when he's what did he do? What did he do to occupy his time, or he would just sit around and drank, or did Bill Richmond try to provide opportunities for him other than boxing to keep his mind going? What did he do in between fights?
Well, after he became a fighter, so to speak, that was all he did. That was his life. And the problem was what he did between fights was exactly what you said. He would go hang out at the pubs. He was very popular. He was literally couldn't keep the women off of him. He had women all over him. He, as a black man walking down the main streets of London with two white women on either arm and two or three others trailing him. I mean, this guy was, he definitely had some fun, but ultimately, that was the cause of death. And that's why I blame a lot on Richmond, because Richmond had been down this road. Richmond was a fellow freed slave who was born an American, who was actually assigned to a British officer in the Revolution and decided to go back to England with him rather than stay in the United States. And, I look at it as Molyneux had to seek out Richmond. He originally went over there to try and find a different trainer, Gregory. And, Gregory was white, and he didn't want him. He said, "Nah, what you need, go to your own people. Go to Bill Richmond." And Bill Richmond was a very good trainer, but one of my hang-ups with the guy was that he did not look out for Molyneux. He should have said, "Hey, stay away from the women, stay in the gym, maybe not bring him out as much." Bill Richmond would bring him out to the pubs because he was trying to get money for himself. The more he promoted this guy, the more he could, tap into his cut. You know what I mean? So he didn't really do the right thing. He didn't do the right thing.
Okay. Now, as a boxer, what would you say was the strength of Molyneux in terms of his fighting style? Did he have a jab? Did he just go toe-to-toe with his fighter? Did he move around? Things like that. Did he, I don't know what his training was. Was he able to build up his body, able to take body shots? What kind of fighter do you think he was?
Well, Tom, first of all, boxing was not the way it is today. So, jabs and the science that we see today and how it evolved was because of fighters like Molyneux. He was more of a attacker. He had what they call, his famous punch was a hammer blow. It was a punch that kind of started up and came down, almost like you were swinging a hammer to hit a nail, and that's how he would hit people. Like a power shot. He wasn't delivering punches the way we do today. So it was more of a who could last the longest, taking shots, and you were allowed to do a lot of things. Like, you were allowed to hold a guy and pummel him with a headlock or something like that, as long as he didn't hit the ground. You could grab him and wrestle him, more like an MMA type of a sport than what we know today as a stand-up boxing.
What would be what would be considered a disqualification?
A disqualification in during his time?
Yeah.
A disqualification during his time would be like if they did not come to scratch within the 30 seconds, they would have lost. If he had been found to have been cheating, one of the things that they did with Molyneux to try and get Cribb more time when he was, pummeling him. They claimed that he had bullets in his hands. For like,
really?
Like if somebody would have, like a roll of quarters in their hands and they punch you, they claimed that he had bullets in his hands, and they had to stop the action and check his hands, and so that would have been grounds for disqualification. If a fighter, there was a fight that Molyneux was in, where he was, when he was beginning to lose his mind. He was running around the ring. I picture in my head like a Three Stooges scenario. He was running around the rings, and his opponent was there, and he's running around, and everybody's kind of wondering what the heck's going on, and the referee was going to disqualify him. And then the most bizarre thing happened. The opponent kind of fell and knocked himself out, and Molyneux won the fight. So it was kind of comical, but that's what happened.
Now, no kicking was allowed. Like say, if a guy he happened to knock him down, would he be disqualified if he was caught kicking him? As they say, kick a man when he's down. Of
course. Once a guy was down, that was the end of the round. So if he, if a fighter was down and they said the end of the round and he kicked him, he went over and kicked him, yes, there's a good chance that he would have been disqualified.
Now, in Molyneux's case, let's say a fight took, let's say, 10 to 15 rounds, maybe even 20 rounds. What would be the recovery period before his next fight? How long would it take him to recover from his injuries?
Oh, it would take weeks, even months sometimes, for them to recover. It was, you're talking brutal. I mean, sometimes they didn't recover. Sometimes they never fought again. This was not for the. It was brutal. That's all I could say.
Now,
they weren't fighting. I tell you what, they weren't fighting like in the Sugar Ray Robinson era where fighters were fighting once a week. That wasn't happening in the bare knuckle days. There's no way.
Now, how many years did he fight though? How many years?
He only fought. He passed away by the time he was 36 years old. So he didn't fight that long.
Oh, okay. So
and then he also went on like a he also went on like a tour. So I mean, if you count his first fight in say 1801. He was his last fight before he passed away was in 1815. So that was his last fight. So, I mean, I guess if you're going to look at years, you're going to say he had a 14-year, 15-year career. That includes his slave fight. From the time he won that fight. All the way until his death. But by the time he died, 3 years later, this was a man that barely weighed 60 pounds. Couldn't feed himself, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything. He was, helpless.
Okay. I was going to say, Tom Cribb, his last opponent or so. How good a fighter was Cribb?
Well, Cribb was considered the best fighter on the planet. That was why the story of Tom Molyneux is so remarkable. I mean, here's a guy that is born a slave, finds his way to England with no friends, no help from anyone, and challenges who many regarded as the best fighter on the planet at the time. And he was a good fighter. He by the time he retired, I mean, he he was claimed to be the champion of England. That was his final title. They gave it to him, and he that was his lifelong title, basically, even after his retirement. Now, he went and opened up a pub in England that still stands today.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's still in operation today. He lost it, over before he passed, but his pub is still open today.
Now, Cribb defeated Molyneux in Molyneux's last fight, knocked him out, broke his jaw, knocked him out in the 11th round. After that fight, Richmond and Molyneux parted ways. How did that what happened then at that point? What did Richmond do at that point?
Well, Richmond, the second Cribb fight, he didn't train. Molyneux didn't train for that fight at all, and he had, totally have been absorbed by the nightlife, so to speak, and all of that, and basically, Richmond knew that his cash cow was starting to fade pretty quickly. And they parted ways because Molyneux started to sense that he was getting ripped off by Richmond. Didn't feel that he was getting them the right fights, and thought he was better than he was. And at one point, Richmond sued him, and actually was able to get all the money that he owed him from a future purse that he had received. So they did not end on good terms at all.
And he eventually died penniless. So really things, was he given a decent burial, or how did that go toward the end?
Actually, nobody knows where he's actually buried. Just before my book was released, I had gotten some new information. I put it in the book about a college class that was doing some research and found that they may well have discovered his grave, but there was no exact proof that they did. He didn't have any relatives or kids that he knew of. There's no way to DNA. There was no way to find the actual bones at that time, especially African. Well, I don't want to say African Americans because it was in Ireland, but the black people were not treated fairly. They were buried in groups, and especially in the nature that he passed away. He's buried according to where they feel that he's buried. He's buried with several other people, and to distinguish who's who and to prove that he's there is still ongoing. So right now they have an idea that he's in Dublin, Ireland, but they haven't confirmed it yet as of now.
Okay. Now, had he got the proper education back then, like learning to read, learning to write, would he have had a future back in that day in the 1800s after boxing?
No, because of the color of his skin. It was a different world. He wouldn't have gotten the treatment. He would have ended up not maybe as bad as he did. The reason why it's so bad and sad is because he reached the pinnacle. He should have been. Tom Molyneux doesn't even get the credit that he deserves today. First of all, he should be considered America's first heavyweight champion. He doesn't even get that credit, even though I've found and proved it in my book that he should be considered and was considered. A guy that gets considered to be the first American heavyweight champion came. It was like 75 years after Molyneux's death. But to make it even worse, they had they segregated. They have a guy that's considered the first black American champion, which came another 60 years after his death. So they don't even give him the credit for being the first. Forget the color of his skin. He was the first heavyweight champion of America. Forget it. Doesn't matter what the color of his skin was. That's the whole reason why I put out the book. This is a man that's not getting his credit where it's due, even today, 200 years after he passed away. You know, even the history books aren't giving him the credit. So that's the big hang-up I have about Molyneux. And to be honest, if you read the book, you would know that the first fight with Tom Cribb in December of 1810, for all intent purposes, he beat Cribb not once, not twice, but 3 times in that fight, and that's all documented in not just my book, but in my research and my findings, the actual articles that I had. The truth of the matter is, and then finally, after the crowd rushes him and throws him down and does all this stuff, he finally gets knocked out and loses. You know, but the truth is that they should have called that fight 3 times before Tom Cribb couldn't make it in 30 seconds. So really, Tom Molyneux not only is the first American heavyweight champion, he should be regarded as the first world heavyweight champion, and he doesn't get that credit. So, you know, and Tom Cribb does. But you know, it's a shame. It's a shame that he doesn't, and that's really the basis of my book.
Okay. In terms of his legacy, I understand that there's a hand-colored etching of Molyneux by Robert Dickton, and it's held in the National Portrait Gallery in London. So that's the good thing there. Yeah,
but you know, there's in my book we had several of the sketches, but that's not. Listen, the truth of the matter is that Tom Molyneux not only is an important piece of boxing history, he's an extremely important piece of American history and Black American history, and he's being shoveled under the carpet. You know, nobody's heard of Tom Molyneux. I've been in the boxing business for 37 years, and there's people in the sport that never heard of who Tom Molyneux is, and that is the problem. You know, we should know, people should know who he is because of what he accomplished. And, you know, a lot of young fighters today, you asked me early in this interview about fighters being able to you know, fight during that era, fighters of today. The biggest problem that young fighters do today is they don't learn the history of the sport, and neither do the fans. You know, a lot of the fans just look at what they see today, and it's a shame because, you know, guys like Molyneux and for 100 years after him gave literally their lives for this sport. And, you know, it's being shoveled under the carpet. It's a shame. It's a travesty, really.
It is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, what I understand here, Molyneux's fight, the last fight with Cribb, was actually turned into a play in 2014 called The Prize Fighters. I have to check that out and see that if they're going to revise it. It was done by Ed Viney. Have you been able to see that?
No, I haven't. There was a renewed interest. As a matter of fact, I was part of a documentary that featured Tom Molyneux, and it also featured the slave trade of Ireland. And that was the whole point of it, that a lot of people don't realize that Ireland was, you know, pretty big on the slave trade during that time. And, you know, they were doing this documentary about that. Tom Molyneux was part of it because, he ended up spending his last days in Ireland, and they had asked me to be part of it. I forget. I apologize. I forget the name of it, but it has been released. And so at least there's, the worst part of it, to be honest with you, is that they don't. If they're going to do the historical part, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking at hey, this is going to make a great play, or this is going to, my book has been optioned. People are looking to do a movie on it. Yeah, it's going to be great movie. It is a great movie, but probably for the different reasons than what I want. It's probably a good movie because it makes a good Hollywood showcase, especially if it was done correctly. But is it really getting the message across that I tried to get? Probably not.
Okay, understandable. Because up until now, up until this interview, I never heard of Tom MOLINEAUX. So this has been an education for me as well. Before I let you go, and I really appreciate you coming on. This has been great. Let's talk about briefly your show, the Billy C. Show. How long have you been doing this show?
Our show, our show, the Talk of Boxing with Billy C. Show, has been going on. We're in our 15th year. Basically, real quick, we started out, I owned a gym in Poughkeepsie, New York, and we started out with the gym and to do this show just as I was been involved in the sport, so I was a promoter and everything else, so we were trying to figure some ways to promote the gym. And we came up with a way to do a boxing talk show in the gym, in the boxing gym. And that's where it started. It started 15 years ago. It was a 1-hour show once a week in our gym called Snoop's Gym in Poughkeepsie. And it immediately took off. It went from a 1-hour show on the internet to a 2-hour show to a weekly show, 2-hour weekly show, to a daily show. And then our big goal was to get on the radio at that time, and we got on the radio. Then we expanded into TV, and we're on TV, and now we're back with a presence on the internet, but we're still on radio, TV, podcast, internet, YouTube, the whole nine. So it's doing very well. We broadcast daily, live, from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, and our show, BillyCBoxing.com, is the best place to go for all the info. It's got all the links and all that stuff, BillyCBoxing.com.
Okay, and one last thing. What is your opinion of the UFC, and in particular, the possibility of Mayweather fighting McGregor, but now it's going to be MMA, where Mayweather will be fighting in the cage. What do you think? What is your assessment of all that? Because I personally think it, at this point, just let it be the way it is. I mean, Mayweather won the last bout between those two, and now he wants to see if he can do it as far as UFC. What do you feel about the whole UFC?
Well, UFC, UFC is a league that was very successful in being able to harness these types of athletes, the MMA fighters, and a league would have been great for boxing if it took place like the UFC. Dana White formed the UFC in the beginning stages, so now it would be virtually impossible to not be part of the UFC. I mean, yes, I know that there's other, mixed martial arts leagues like Bellator, etc. But the UFC, the idea was good. As far as Mayweather, listen, I'm a boxing historian and I love the sport. Mayweather was actually bad for boxing. He was good for Mayweather. There's no question. Floyd was good for Floyd. Floyd made a lot of money, and he was all about himself. But I'm a guy that likes the history of the sport and the good of the sport. Floyd did none of that for the sport. As a matter of fact, Floyd made a lot of fighters, think like him, take the easiest way for the most money, which is great for your pocketbook, bad for the sport. The McGregor fight, the first one, was a scam. There was no way that the commission should have allowed a guy in Conor McGregor who was never fought professionally as a boxer, never even fought as an amateur, to fight a guy that was 49-0 and was a multi-division world champion. Think about that. A guy that had 49 professional fights, plus a decorated amateur career where he performed and won a medal in the Olympics. Fighting a guy who never fought boxing before. And Floyd was able to sell it to all those millions of people that bought it. And it's a joke. As far as Mayweather going to a cage, I guarantee you, as sure as you and I are talking, that Mayweather will never step in a cage against Conor McGregor under MMA rules. Floyd will try to change it so he's in a cage, maybe, but you're not allowed to kick, you're not allowed to do this. That's what Floyd does, and that's what bothers me about Floyd, because I don't think we ever saw the best Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather had the talent, there's no question, but he never engaged. He never did things that you see great fighters do, like the Sugars, Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson. They took chances, they took risks. Floyd really never did, and more power to him. He was able to come out. He's never took a beating, and more power to him. But for the good of the sport, the historical aspect, and by the way, might as well just throw this in too. That 50-0 means nothing, except in the heavyweight division. The only guy that's close to making a substantial move on that is Deontay Wilder. Julio Cesar Chavez went 90 fights before he lost his first fight. Sugar Ray Robinson went 60 fights before he lost his first fight. So 50 fights for a guy that's not a heavyweight really isn't as important as he makes it. But again, power to his genius with his marketing and strategies, because nobody has come close to Floyd Mayweather from that respect.
All right. And on that note, we are out of time. But, Billy, this was a pleasure having you on the show. This was very educational for me. You are always welcome on Sports Tuesday anytime. And
sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right. So you take care, and God bless.
All right, Steve. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, now. Source Nation, that's Billy Calogero. He hosts the Billy C. Boxing Show. You can check that out on his website. And the book is entitled Tom MOLINEAUX from, always got to remember this, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. So that was good. I thank him very much for coming on the show. All right. That's it for me. I had a ball here, and until next week, as I always say, be good and be safe. Take care, everybody.